I'm going to talk about a project that we have done from the Social Security Financial Literacy Center that looks at a particular population. We're going to look at children who age on to the SSI adult program, so these are young SSI adults, and what the returns to work are for them. This is joint work with Rich Burkhauser at Cornell University, and then Phil Armour and Joyce Kwok are graduate students. One's at Cornell and one's at UC Berkeley. So the plan of the talk I have for today is that I'm going to first talk to you about motivation and background. I'm just going to give you a context in which to understand some of the work we're doing and why it's at the stage it's at and where we're going to be heading. Then I'll talk about what our research questions are. I'll focus on our year one findings, which were funded again by the Social Security grant, and then I'll talk to you about our year two plans and preview some of our results. And again, that's coming out of that grant from the Social Security Administration. So what's the motivation? Well, our motivation, I've been studying disability policy for a long time with Rich Burkhauser, and we specifically have looked at SSI. And one of the three striking things really are, I think, important to set the tone. One is that the SSI child population has risen dramatically over time. Following the Daly ruling in 1989, you saw a big increase in the number of children on SSI. Following that fact is that most SSI children actually go directly onto the adult program. So they don't attempt to work and they age on to the SSI adult program. Then once they're on the SSI adult program, they actually don't attempt to work. So increasingly you're finding that children start young on SSI and then move on to SSI adults and then age into SSI retirement. And that's a long time to be on a single welfare program. So we see these outcomes, and I think that we see these outcomes the way the Social Security Administration has also seen them, the advisory board, saying that these are costly to both beneficiaries and to taxpayers. They're costly to beneficiaries because SSI is actually a really low-level benefit that was, its income values were set in relative terms in 1979, and it's only adjusted by the cost of living, so it doesn't keep up with economic growth. So as the economy grows, those SSI benefits fall in relative terms, even though they stay constant in real terms. So they're losing ground over time, SSI beneficiaries. And it's costly to taxpayers because you're increasingly facing more people starting out on SSI children benefits, aging onto adult benefits, never attempting to work, so they're not supporting their incomes, and then the taxpayer is basically moving them from young people to older people. So this is a place, we think, where you have incentive compatibility, as economists would say, where it's not good for the beneficiaries to be in this situation if under different situations available to them, and it's not necessarily good for the taxpayers. And this was called out in the Social Security Advisory Board comments where they said this is something we want to focus on. The outcome, I think, at least this is my narrative of the outcome when I look back over the history, was that many people have recognized this. We're certainly not the first, and in fact, I think one of the reasons that this was a project that SSA has a special interest in is because SSA itself recognized the importance of this issue. And so the Youth Transition Demonstration Project, which is, I abbreviate YTD, was produced or developed. And it's a randomized controlled demonstration project across the United States. And that project, in a report from 2008, identified multiple barriers to work for SSI young adults. And I've listed them here. And the first several you'll recognize that this is just a group of people who have low expectations of work, may not have the confidence or the skills to work, may not be coming from a situation where work is supported in the family or that's thought of as possible. And you have all those other things, access to social and health services, all those things are barriers. And those are what we call, they could be financial, but we're going to put those in the non-financial barriers. But then there's also, and this was called out in the report, lack of knowledge about the financial incentives or disincentives to work. So I want you to think of our efforts just in that one group. We are certainly not comprehensive, and I want to say that right out of the gate. We're really trying to produce something that individuals who are working in the YTD programs and things could use to supplement all the other important work you have to do if you're going to help a population of people transition from young adulthood to working age. So our work is really on those last two. So what are our research questions? Our research questions are, what are the financial incentives and disincentives facing young adults when they decide whether or not to work? Now you might think this is already answered. We do not need to do anything here, but I want to show you the document that tells you what the financial incentives or disincentives are to work. It's called the Red Book. And this is a very comprehensive book, but for a lot of individuals, it's actually not so easy to understand. and it's complicated. And so our first goal was, what are the incentives, and can we clearly put them in some sort of a form where you could do some calculations and figure it out, as opposed to having to go through this. So no criticism to this book, but it's really made for people who can read an entire pamphlet and then figure out where they fit in on that. And so one of the areas was, can we take this book and then figure out what really the incentives and disincentives are? That was our first goal. Then we actually ask, are the incentives and disincentives well documented and well understood? And they are well documented, but I don't think that they're well understood. And then finally, and this is where, if you've gone outside and looked at the booth, we have a booth about this. This is certainly the second year of our work. Can we increase the knowledge and improve the understanding by developing some tools that can be used by parents, advocates, benefits counselors, and the beneficiaries themselves to basically understand what's right for me? So that's where I'm going to focus most of my attention. We'll focus most of the attention on the second year. Okay, so what are the main findings from year one? The one that I think I found most remarkable, even though I have actually studied this for a long time, I did not realize, and neither did my colleague Rich Burkhauser, how rewarding work was financially for young adults. And so the first takeaway is it's very financially rewarding. It's actually shocking when you think of how many rewards there are to work that more people don't work. So you have to think, what are the barriers? Why is it productive for them to work? Well, the earnings retention rules, and for those of you familiar with SSI, it won't surprise you, the earnings retention rules are very beneficial in SSI. It's a 50% tax back on your benefit. So if you work, you're getting 50 cents on the dollar, which isn't the same as dollar for dollar, but you're still getting a benefit. It's not completely one for one, which some means-tested programs have been historically. So then the second part is, with a modest amount of work, these young SSI benefits can qualify for Social Security disability insurance, which is we're going to argue, a preferred benefit. So with a modest amount of work, when you're young, you have sort of a sweet spot where you can qualify for DI, and DI is a preferred benefit over your lifetime. So you can substitute an insurance benefit for a welfare benefit with a small amount of work when you're at a young age. So that makes it particularly valuable to work when you're young. And then the final one is that the ability to easily, and by easily I mean that you're in the sweet spot to qualify for SSDI, actually fades away pretty fast. If you don't start working by the time you're 23, that sweet spot's over by the time you're 25. And so essentially, our takeaway is, if you're going to dedicate some energy towards encouraging work, really doing it in this juncture has many benefits. Has benefits to the young people themselves for a variety of reasons, which the YTD has already named, but it has benefits to them financially, because if they are unable to continue working throughout their life, they can qualify for this DI benefit, which allows them to have better or equal income, but be on an insurance program instead of a welfare program. And I'll talk to you in a minute about why that's important. I do want to, since we have a little extra time than I had planned, I thought I had 10 minutes, I just want to make one caveat to this, because many people in the audience, I think, have already brought it up to me, is that we are doing this outside of the context of Medicaid, Medicare trade-offs. In the paper, we do recognize that these trade-offs between Medicare and Medicaid can be binding, and the way we've treated it so far is that with healthcare reform, we might actually be in a different environment where that is not a binding constraint anymore, and that might equalize the playing field and make the income calculations we're doing the relevant constraint. If that isn't the case, if the healthcare reform doesn't play out that way, then our goal would be take this information to policymakers more broadly and say, look, many more people might actually work. We think we can tell them the benefits. We think that we can even educate them about the benefits. But if Medicaid is giving something that Medicare won't provide, you're not going to get people to give up one and go to the other. So that's the context in which I think you should think about this analysis, because I don't want to pretend we're doing something we're not. We really haven't treated that in a very specific way. Okay. So let me just show you a couple of graphs that illustrate the basics aspects of our findings. The first one is that you can boost your monthly income if you work while you're on SSI. So this is a simple graph that shows you hours worked per week and then your monthly income. And all this does is plot the $65 disregard on income and then the 50% tax back on your benefit. That's all this is. It's just taking the formula in the book that many of you already know and putting it in a plot that shows the value of work. And you can see that at all hours up to 40, you're increasing your monthly income or your weekly income by working, and this is at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So our point here is that even if you don't think about the DI component, you're not actually trying to incent people to apply for disability insurance, you simply are trying to educate them about the value of work. This is the basis of showing them the value, and then you can think about how to illustrate that in a calculator. But this is the basis of the value. They improve their monthly income if they can work. And I think that was a fairly easy, straightforward thing to do. That takes a couple of days just to program it in and say, okay, it doesn't even take a couple of days. It's an easy thing to understand. The piece we did next was to say, well, what about if you want to think about SSDI? This just shows you why we think it's a preferred benefit. First of all, if you get to a situation, let's just take an example where a person reaches 25 and they're never going to be able to work fully engaged in the labor market. That's not going to be possible for them. But they want to engage partially in the labor market. You're better off being on DI, if you can do it, than SSI, as long as you stay under that $1,000 limit because it's untaxed. Your benefit's not reduced at all. Whereas if you're on SSI, you always get the 50% reduction. So qualifying for SSDI helps you in that regard, if you can stay under the 1,000, if that's your scenario. Otherwise, you go down to the rest of this, your unearned income is untouched if you're on SSDI because it's an insurance benefit. There are no asset limits. You can get transfers from your family members, or you can start a savings account, and you will not be worrying about missing your means test. So our argument is these are preferred benefits. You're in an insurance-based benefit, which is always going to trump a welfare benefit as long as, holding Medicare and Medicaid constant, as long as you can qualify. Now, importantly, the last two is that if you continue to work and incorporate your work into your quarters of coverage, and you can increase your DI benefit, where you can never increase your SSI benefit. That's a fixed benefit. It's a welfare benefit. So you don't get any return on working in terms of boosting your potential annuity, whereas in DI you do. And I think that's an important piece also, is to convey to people, is that you're boosting your own return if you can get on the DI program. And then the final thing is that because of that, benefits being indexed to wages and not indexed to just this to 1979 and adjusted for the CPI, you end up maintaining your incomes. When you leave and get an SSDI benefit, you're actually setting your relative wage closer to where the economy is. Where if you go out and claim an SSI benefit, you're in a relative position that was set in 1979, which really puts you behind, mostly on falling further and further below poverty for a long time. So that is why we've argued it's a preferred benefit. Then the question is it possible for these young people to get on it? And our argument is it's not implausible. And here's why. The basic requirements of getting on SSDI are earn sufficient quarters of coverage to become fully insured and DI insured, meet the computation years for your AIME, for your age group, and then generate an AIME that beats the SSI benefit. That's the general requirements. Now, what's so great about being young in this situation? Well, the thresholds are substantially lower if you're 18 to 24 than they are any year after that. You have very low quarters of coverage requirements. You only need 6 quarters where your earnings in each quarter have to be $1,120, which is a very doable amount under a lot of scenarios. Average indexed monthly earnings. So that's the average index monthly earnings. So it's the amount of money that you're going to get this, and they're going to index it. But mostly, which the AIME is so important because it determines your benefit. It goes into the formula that determines your benefit. And why the 2 years over which you're calculating this AIME is important is because that means you're shortening the period over which you average your earnings. So if you could work for 4 years, but every year you made more money, they would take your last two or two highest AIME over a 2-year period. So you're really going to benefit yourself when you're young because it shortens up the period over which you average. It's just like a retirement program. At the Fed, we average over the last 5 years of highest 5 years of service, last 5 years of service. If we did it over 30, it would be lower. So that's the benefit. Then the final one is that the AIME that beats SSI. So you got an SSI benefit that's fixed in time, $674 in 2010. The average index monthly earnings you have to generate that will give you a DI benefit that beats the SSI has been falling over time. And I want to show you that. So let me start with first of all, it takes a modest amount of work to qualify. Now, the way I've tried to portray this is to put it in the minimum wage and hours space so that you can see what we can get on the same playing field, essentially. So the red line there is the SSI federal benefit level. Doesn't have state supplementation in it, although our calculator does. So it's $674. This is your average index monthly earnings you have to generate. And then it says how much of that, how much money do I have to generate to break even or beat or match the SSI rate. And so what it's telling you is in 2010, you had to generate $749 in average index monthly earnings. So that's on a monthly basis, or have $749. At the federal minimum wage, that's you have to work 26 hours per week. So if you can be a young person and work 26 hours per week at the federal minimum wage, you will, if you claimed at age 25, so you only worked for the years between 18 and 24 or 23 and 25, you claimed at age 25 and you took the DI benefit that you got from that, you would end up with a benefit that was equal to SSI, but you would have no asset tests, no unearned income tests, and you would be on the insurance program as opposed to the welfare program. So we're saying that it's plausible to get onto a preferred benefit program with a modest amount of work if you define modest amount of work, which at 26 hours per week at the federal minimum wage for a short period of time. Now, the key thing that makes it seem that we found remarkable was that this did not used to be the case. This is actually not a recent phenomenon, but an increasingly higher return to work than it used to be. So this graph is just trying to say the following. In 1980, the break-even, or that thing I just showed you, that break-even AIME, how much do I have to earn on a monthly basis to get on the DI benefit and have it be the same as the SSI benefit, was at the federal minimum wage 48 hours per week, which at least for most people in the United States isn't even a plausible amount, much less if you have other challenges like a disability in the workplace. So this was a system where it was reasonable for people to stay on SSI. I mean, it was rational. It was reasonable, rational. It's hard to generate 48 hours of work per week at the minimum wage. But now you're only doing 26 hours. So what's the thing that we really want to emphasize in this calculator, and I think it's mostly we want to emphasize to advocates when we shop the calculator, is that the window of opportunity for young people closes quickly. And you can think of a lot of reasons it closes quickly. If you get people in early, it's easier to generate work interest, etc. But from a benefit perspective, the window closes early. This green box here shows you that if you don't start working by age 22, you really start to see your computation years, how much they're going to average, how many years of work they're going to average your AIME over. That's growing. And then your DI eligibility, once you hit 22 and a half, starts to rise. It takes more quarters of coverage to generate a benefit. So both of these mean that getting people to work in the 18 to 23-year-old range, or during the treatment period that's the youth transition demonstration, in this transition age, is very important. So let me conclude just by telling you what we're doing for year 2, and some of it is prototyped out there in the booth. We want to increase the understanding of these results. So our goal now is, we wrote a paper that's included in this the guide you got, but we just finished a more complete academic paper that we're presenting at the Southern meetings this weekend, and we want to just generate more research interest in this issue. And then the other thing we want to do is turn this research into practice. That's a term one of my colleagues, Jody, in the audience here coined. Turn our research into practice by taking the results we've got and putting them into a calculator and a set of written materials for advocates and counselors, so that we can try to see, we're going to test this, see does it make any difference? Can we help with improving the work interest for people on SSI, perhaps through the Youth Transition Demonstration Program or more generally. So thank you for your attention.